Dwayne N6DMR. This video I'm doing now is for new users of the D878 and pretty much also the 868. People that have either radio as new users will benefit from this video. Typically the radio arrives without any instructions or firmware other than the manual. And the manual will refer you to the Anytone website, but rather than just leave new users on their own, I thought I'd do this video and hopefully give them some help. So as a new user, when you open up your radio, you will have none of the information that I'm about to show you. So it's up to you to go and download it from your favorite download site. Now this typically would be your dealer. I'm not going to, I'm very neutral with my videos, so I'm not going to endorse any dealers. But typically this is what you'd see. You'd be able to go to a CPS and firmware download, and you'd be looking for the 878, or in your 868 case, the 868. And the firmware update for the 878 is the 1.11N as in Nancy. There's an important difference with the Nancy update, as it did not change anything really in the firmware, or in the CPS, but it did reformat the way the files are extracted during download. So this folder, once you download, or this file, once you download it, it'll be either a zip file or an RAR format, and you'll have to extract it to a folder as the first thing. So that's the number one issue. So the next thing I want to show you is, and I'm going to back up a little bit here. I keep my Anytone files under amateur radio, DMR, Anytone, the model number of the radio, and then I have a subfolder for updates of the firmware and CPS. So in this case, you can see I've got the beta, the official, and the N version. So we're going to open up the N version folder. So these are the folders that will extract from the zip file that's right here. And we'll open the zip file real quickly to get a view of it. And inside are the folders that we already see. I've already done the extraction on this. So normally what I do, I use 7-Zip. It's a free program, works really well. You go into 7-Zip and you just do an extract here, and it will work for zip and RAR files. So it's a one-stop solution, so to speak. So now that I've extracted these, some of the changes are that there's an instruction folder with all the instructions that you're going to need. There's a CPS update file folder, which is where you're going to find your CPS to run and update and get the software running for the CPS customer programming software. And then there's an update file for the firmware right here. And then there's also a file for an icon update. And some firmware updates require icons, some do not. There's also a folder for the JSON to CSV conversion program that Anytone has supplied. There's a great programming guides. There's different languages for these programming guides. They're initial programming guides. They will be a big help to you. I'll open one up here. We'll open the English one up right here. And it has an index and lots of information. Not going to go over this, but how to get started is in there. So lots of help is available through this guide. And then there's also a VFO programming PDF in case you want to familiarize yourself with that. So let's go up and get out of there. And then there is Anytone is still supplying a virtual USB driver, but it's only if needed at this point. Okay, only if needed. And we're going to go into that as we look at the instructions. So I'm going to open up the folder that you need to look at, which is named A Read First Update Instructions. And in this folder are all the instructions on how to operate with your Anytone. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the changelog. Typically this will be in PDF or a MS Word format. We like PDF. I think that we're going to probably try to standardize to the format of PDF. Anyway, when you open this up, there's an important notice. It's basically telling you that if and when you update the firmware, there's a reset required of the radio to actually activate the firmware. You turn it off, hold the PTT and the PF1 button, at the same time and then power it on. And there will be actually a menu that comes up asking you to confirm the reset. There's a green menu button on the front of the radio that you would use to confirm, and then it will bring up some fields that have to be corrected for your location, GMT, the date and the time. And what you would use is the P1 key, which is underneath the green menu key on the radio, and that will navigate you through the different fields, and they will turn red so that you know you're in the right area. And you can use the P1 to go from month, day, year, hour, minutes, etc. So when you're finished with those setups, then only then you would hit the green menu button and confirm that you want to do the update, and that will save all the settings that you've corrected for your location. So also a first step is to install the customer programming software, or CPS, by running this setup with the version number in place of the xxx.exe setup file. And that is in the CPS program folder, which we're going to show you. And then after installing the CPS, there's a couple of steps you have to do right off the bat before you do anything else. And the first is go to Menu, Tools, and then Options on the top. I'm going to go over all of this in the CPS as part of this video. And you would be setting what options you have. If you have a GPS, if you have Bluetooth, if you have a 500-hour record module, or if you're using a PRS, there's like a checkbox that you would check for the options that you want. A caution on the 500-hour record especially, do not check this if you do not have the 500-hour record module. If you do, it will bypass the normal 8-hour record menus in the CPS, and it will give you the 500-hour record menu, which is not compatible with a radio that does not have that module in it. Most radios will not have a 500-hour record unless you specified that. So that is one you do not really need to check. Okay, then let's talk quickly about USB drivers. What we're finding is most users, many it says here, but most users of the 878 and even the 868, if they're running Windows 10 and if they're actually running Windows 7 and it's updated, normally the Windows driver will be self-install. So what you would do is, if you get a new radio and your PC is Windows 10, you don't install any other virtual driver. You just plug the radio in to the USB cable and to the port on your PC and your radio, turn the radio on, and let Windows find the driver. And typically with Windows, if it finds the USB driver, it will give you a tone that says, hey, we just connected a driver. Now, there's two ways to see if this has been successful. One is to look into Device Manager. The other is to look at the programming software, the CPS, once you've loaded it. So in the changelog, going further here, this is the changelog for 1.11, 1.11, and it's the same for N. N only changed some formatting in the files that we're updating with. So the rest of the changes are the same. Now you'll note that it says in red with a yellow that this firmware update requires an icon update. That's a separate update. You do the firmware update first, and then second you would do the icon update, and then typically you would do the MCU reboot to lock everything in. So this is a list of changes. The big thing with 1.11 that most people didn't realize is although the radio main menu screen and the radio screen had a black background, all the menu screens were changed to black background, which is much easier to see in daylight. And then there was a lot of issues addressed on the new Bluetooth module that was installed, and there's a few others that you can see. But another very important change here is item 14. In this CPS update, Anytone implemented a new startup reset option, which will allow you to turn off or turn on the MCU reboot, okay, or the radio reset. So if you do not turn this on, when you press the PTT and the PF1 button, you will not get the MCU reboot. So what you have to do in the CPS, and again, I'm going to walk you through this in the actual CPS, you need to go up to the optional settings menu on the left side, open up the power on menu, and the bottom field is a startup reset field. It should be defaulted to on. If it's not, you want to change it and reset it to on. And then what you have to do is save the code plug and write it to the radio. Now you can do this with the default code plug, or you can actually open your code plug up, make the changes, and then go ahead and save and write it to the radio. If you use the default CPS, when you actually open your code plug that is your personal code plug, you should check this option and make sure that the startup reset is turned on, and then save the code plug. That way your standard code plug will also turn on the MCU reboot. Okay, that's all I'm going to cover really here. There's other updates. If you wanted the history, it's in here, and you can see that from the history. So that's your change log. I'm going to go over the instructions very quickly here, but then I'm going to do the CPS and walk you through some of the updates that you do through the CPS. So here's a firmware update instruction. Okay, so this basically will allow you to do a firmware update. So remember, we need to find the correct COM port. So what I recommend is, after you load the CPS, if you want to load your code plug into it, that's fine. Go ahead and do all the settings that we talked about previously for the MCU reboot. Do a save. And then at the top menu, select Set and select Set COM. And this will open up a communication setting window. So at this point, you're ready now to actually plug the radio in and turn it on and make sure that there's a COM port for that radio. So when you plug the radio cables in, make sure they're tight into the radio especially. That's an issue that some folks don't get it all the way into the radio. Connect it to the PC USB, and then turn the radio on. And as the radio boots up, when it is in its actual communication mode, you will see a COM port added to this COM port screen. And at that point, you would go ahead and select the COM port, the new COM port that came up. And it's an easy way to check if you forget what your COM port, if you have many COM ports and time goes by and you forget which one is your Anytone. By turning the radio off, running the CPS, doing this set COM, turning the radio on, the new COM port will pop up and you'll be able to recognize it. So that's an important quick step for getting started, because the new CPS will take the COM port that you select here during firmware update, and it will use that COM port. So if you haven't done this step and try to do a firmware update, it could fail to write because it doesn't see the COM port properly. Okay, so let's move on down the page here. Use the cable, a PC cable to connect to the radio of the PC. It's a USB to Kenwood style 2-plug. Always turn off the GPS and APRS in the radio menu before any update, because these are automatically turned on if the settings are set that way, and APRS will transmit on an interval, which you don't want to have any transmit going on when connecting the cable to the PC. Could cost you some damage. So essentially you want to just make sure you're not auto sending any APRS or any GPS data. So by turning off those two menus, you would basically be safe to plug the radio in. It's just something that Anytone wanted to make sure that people understood. You don't want to transmit into that cable. Okay, so the first thing that you do here, and we're on the firmware update, okay? So to do a firmware update, we've got the radio plugged in, we've done the set COM, and now we're ready to go ahead and update firmware. So in this case, you hold the PTT key down and the PF3 key on the top, which is in the 878 it's the blue button, and in the 868 it's the orange button, and then turn the radio on while holding those, and you will get a blinking red light here on the LED, which will tell you that you're in the firmware update mode. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of this. I think these instructions are pretty good. You would basically, in the tools firmware icon and update, firmware icon update, you choose open update file, which is this to this. You select the file you want to upload, and it'll give you a success that it opened. Of course, you would start with the firmware because of the radio being in the firmware mode. And anyway, you can read these instructions for yourself. I think they're self-explanatory. Plus, I'm going to go through this in the CPS. I'm going to actually do a firmware upgrade in this video. So the next one is icon update instructions. It's very, very similar to firmware update. The difference is that the PTT key and the PF2 key, which is the bottom side key, have to be held at the same time. Turn on the radio, and you will get an LCD display that says update mode, and then you would go through the firmware and icon update process, and you would open up the icon update file, which is in the folder that says icon update. Okay, so that's, and then this is a very brief, this is a conversion program. It's got some instructions on it. The Anytone has provided a conversion program from JSON because the RadioID.net DMR database for digital contacts no longer has a CSV file listed. It lists the JSON, and when you do a API, what they call it, off of the RadioID.net to pull a CSV, that CSV is really not formatted properly for the 878. So this program that Anytone supplies is an accurate conversion, and it will take the JSON and make it a CSV. Again, I would read through this. I've tried to do a good job with writing these, and if you have any comments, you can find me through my N6 DMR email. Okay, then there's actually a user manual, which probably a whole bunch of people don't bother to read, but it's fairly comprehensive. It goes through a lot of stuff. It's not going to answer everything, but it's a good start, and you can always go out on one of the Facebook pages, groups, and ask questions, and there's a bunch of people that will help you. Now, this is the virtual driver installation, and this is, I'm just going to open it. Okay, so there's a new driver. It's this is the version number. It's in the update. I'm not going to go through this because most of the folks are not going to need this. Okay, so let's go up. We've quickly gone through some instructions to get you started. So let's look at the other folders. This folder here is the CPS folder. So it says the 878 UV CPS with the version, and there it is. It's a CPS setup. You would run this, and it would load the CPS. And we are going to actually do that. I'm going to reload it into my machine just to show you how that works. But I want to run through these files first. When you do a firmware update, this is the folder that has the firmware SPI file. And that's the file that when you go to select the file in a firmware upgrade, this is the file that you want to look for right there. Same thing with the icon, that you would basically open up, and there's an icon SPI right there, and that would be the icon folder. And then again, this is the conversion program. You can run this. It's in a zip. You'd have to extract it. Let's go ahead and extract it. Okay, so there's a few files and DLLs that go with it, but essentially to open it, you just open up this JSON to CVS exec file, and it'll open that program up for you. And I actually do have a complete video on this on my N6DMR YouTube page, which takes you through downloading the JSON using the conversion program. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel with this video, but that's where you would find the JSON to CSV conversion program. I've already shown you the programming guides, and then the last thing, if needed, are the COM drivers. It's a RAR. You would have to extract it. I'm not going to do it. It's self-explanatory. You extract it. When you run the exec file, it'll ask you whether you have a 32-bit or a 64-bit, and you'd load the drivers. I recommend not doing this unless you absolutely have to. Okay, so that is essentially what the new instructions look like. So remember, you would be downloading the zip file from your dealer, and then you would be able to have all these instructions at your fingertips. So anything I cover in the video should be covered just as carefully in the update instructions. Okay, so thanks for listening to this. Now let's go ahead and get into our CPS. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run the update program for the CPS. Now keep in mind, I already have this installed on my PC, so it's just going to do a reinstall in the same location. But I wanted to show folks, it's going to ask you your language, and there's a few languages. I happen to use English. You choose, of course, your language that's comfortable for you. This is the welcoming screen, and it's giving you an opportunity to make sure you definitely want to make this install, which you do. And then here you will get a location. Now this location may be defaulted to a D drive. It may be defaulted to a different name. It's important that you pay attention to this and put this installation files where you actually want them. And in my case, I like to keep them on the C drive. I like to identify them by the radio model number and then the actual version, and whether it's a beta or official, because I do quite a bit of beta testing, so it's important for me to know that. And so after you set that properly, you would hit the next button, and this is going to put the program into a shortcut folder in the start menu. And again, this could have a different name in here when you go to do it, so pay attention. I put mine in a folder that has the radio model with the version. Okay. Next, do you want to create a desktop icon? I recommend that. Okay, and then it gives you the locations where things are going. It's a summary, and you would do the install, and the program is going to install. And then what's going to happen now, this one in here is saying I've already got it on here. You won't get that, so I'm going to ignore that, and I'm just going to go ahead and now this is the finished thing. I'm sorry about that error message, but since I already have everything loaded. Now here's an error right here in the window. It's saying that this version is 110. That's incorrect. It's actually 1.11. This will be corrected in the next firmware update, so it won't confuse people. But after we load this, I'm going to show you that the About Help screen version is actually 111. And also apologize for any time. This was an update that went out very fast just before they were shutting down for the day. And you know, it's a human error in the naming. So let's finish this. Close my, well, we don't have to. The CPS has now opened, 878. I'm going to look at the help screen, and as I told you, there's the version 111. Okay, so now let's go ahead. I'm going to grab my cable here, and I'm going to actually do this on my radio while I'm doing this video. I'm not going to be showing you the radio menus or anything. I'm going to be doing just the CPS today. Possibly if there's more confusion, I may do a radio before. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go to the SETCOM and look for my ports. The radio is plugged in. I'm turning it on now. I'm not going to pause this. It shouldn't take too long for this to boot. We'll get a Windows. There's the Windows thing that said, hey, we have a new COM port. And new COM port came in as COM5. So I select COM5 and I select OK. So the next thing I'm going to do, because this is the default code plug. I have a good code plug. I'm going to actually open my code plug. And it's in code plugs. And I have two radios. I have two DMR IDs. I use these to test radios between each other. I'm happen to have the -5 radio or my 028 ID. We're going to open that one. So if you're a new user, you can read the radio if you'd like. There are some basic files in there, and that icon's right here. But rather than do that, I have a code plug and I want to load my code plug. So when I'm done with this video, I don't have to go back and reload everything. So now the next thing we're going to do is check and make sure that our COM is correct, and it is COM5. I do this as a safety. Now to go into the update firmware mode, okay, we would click on the tool menu up here. We would go to the firmware and icon update. Now, a little bit of a confusion here. This does list a COM port, but there's no pull down for it because the CPS is now using the set COM port by default when it does a firmware update. So you just can ignore this COM port. The COM speed, duplex, that's all correct. Now, we're going to be doing an update file for the firmware. So I'm going to open up my update file, going to go to my 878 firmware updates, my version 111N, and I'm going to go to the firmware update file folder and select the firmware update SPI. I get a file open success. Now the next thing I have to do is go offline and turn my radio back off, which I'm going to do, okay? And then I'm going to turn the radio, I'm going to hold the PTT and the top button on the radio, turn it back on, and I'm going to get the COM port again, and I'm going to get a red blinking icon, which is now in the update mode. So I will select write, and the radio will write the firmware update. Now keep in mind, when you write a firmware update to the radio, you will lose the code plug that's in the radio. So it's important that you have your code plug saved. Okay? So I'm going to actually go through the firmware update, and then I'm going to do the icon update. And then at that point, I'm going to do the CPS startup reset turn on and write the code plug. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the MCU reboot. So let me pause this while we're waiting. Okay, so we're just about there. And yes, the write was complete. So that was the firmware update. Okay, so since I have this window open, I'm going to go ahead and do the icon update. Now the radio is rebooting at this point, and the firmware is installed, but it has not been configured. We'll open up this, we'll go up. I'm going to select the icon update file, and that's icon SPI. We'll open that up, and I was successful for that. Now, the next thing I have to do is I have to turn the radio off. I have to hold the PTT and the PF2, which is the bottom small button under the PTT on the radio. I turn the radio back on. The radio display will now say update mode, and that means it's ready for the icon update. We'll go ahead and write the icon update, and this is fairly fast, but we'll go ahead and pause. I hate to have long videos, so this shortens. Okay, so we're just about finished with the icon update. Again, we get the write complete, and at this point we can exit the update icon firmware and icon update window. Now both the icon update and the firmware update are in the radio. Now do not get alarmed. After the icon update, the radio does not reboot itself. It stays in the update mode. So you've got to actually turn the radio off and then turn the radio back on normally. The reason we're going to turn the radio on normally is because I'm going to write a code plug just so that we can get the MCU reboot turned on. Okay, so here what we've got is we go to the optional setting first, we go to power on, and right down at the bottom is the startup reset. Now mine is already saved to on. If you're doing a firmware update for the first time to this version of firmware and any future firmwares, this should be defaulted to on. If it's not, you need to check it and turn it on. Once you turn it on and check OK, you can save your code plug and it will be turned on. So I'm going to go ahead, check my COM port. It's good on COM 5, which is my COM port, and then I'm going to write the radio. And I'm writing the code plug to the radio. I'm only going to write the code plug, no digital contact list, to make it quick. And it's very quick. So all the code plug information, channels, and everything have been written, and we now have turned on the MCU reboot. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my radio, and what you want to do for the MCU reboot is hold the PTT and the button, small button immediately under the PTT, which is PF1, and turn the radio on. Now, you're going to get a menu that comes up and it's going to say, are you sure you want to initialize the radio or initialize radio? Now, the green menu button has a confirm above it, and the red menu button has an exit above it in the display. So you would want to use the green menu button to confirm. I think what I'm going to do at this point is insert a video of the screen so that we can have that. So I don't know why this opened up a channel. It shouldn't have, but anyway, it did. Now, I'm in the radio and I have calibrate date at the top. My GMT time is in red. I don't want to touch the green key. Do not touch the green menu key until we're finished. Use the P1 key to navigate and the up and down rocker key to change the settings. So it defaults to GMT +8. I'm in -5. I'm using the down key to go to -5. I'm now going to use the P1 key on the front underneath the green menu key to go to the month, the day field, and I'm going to put in the day of 22, which is the day I'm doing this video. I'm going to use the P1 key to go to the month field, which turns red, make it April. I'm going to use the P1 key to go to the year field, make it 2019. P1 key to make the hour time red. I'm going to change that to 12, which happens to be what time it is here. And then the minutes to 24, which is what time it is here. And I don't do seconds. I don't think it's important to do seconds. You're not going to get that accurate anyway. And then once you have it where you want it, I have it 1224. Now you've got all the changes set. You can hit the green button and you'll see above the green button there's actually a confirm menu. So hit the green button to confirm and your radio is now rebooted and you have completed the process of installing new firmware, installing an icon update, setting the radio so that you can do an MCU reboot by turning startup reset to on, and then we've actually done a startup reset or an MCU reboot, and the radio is now updated with both the icon update and the firmware update. So now this radio is with the firmware. After the MCU reboot, the radio will the screen will have the volume prompt and it will also go off very quickly. So if the screen is black, just use your volume knob to get the screen to come back on, and you'll see it's in a default mode. There may be some Chinese characters on the bottom of the screen, but it's now ready to write the code plug again, which will now write everything that you need. So we're going to go ahead and write to the radio. Okay. Now, in my case, I have digital contact lists in my CPS. I'm going to go ahead and click on digital contact list, which now this is going to take 5 minutes, 8 minutes, depending on how big your contacts and the speed of your computer. So you want to click both of these at this point if you have digital contacts in your radio. I'll click OK, and this is going to take a while. I'm definitely going to pause this so that we don't waste a lot of your time. Okay, we're almost finished with this code plug writing with the digital contact list. And now your radio will reboot, and you are finished. You have now got the code plug and the digital contact list, the upgraded firmware. You're all finished as a new user. Now, a lot of new users don't quite understand the digital contact list. So just quickly, before I end the video, this is where you will see your digital contacts list. And these are the DMR IDs, the call signs, the name, and location that will pop up on your radio screen when you receive a conversation from someone. And it makes it very nice. This radio has the capability of 160,000. The database right now is at about 127,000. So you can still put the complete database of contacts in there. Now, if you clicked on this digital contact list, there'd be quite a bit of delay because it's going to open up all 127,000. But Anytone has broken them out so that you can check them by a smaller amount. So this is going to open up just 20,000. Okay, and there they are. You can see it's ID, call alert, call sign, etc. I'm going to look at the 120 to 140. And remember, this is a snapshot in time of this database as of today, or what's in my user database contacts. So I'm going to go down. We're going to see, there we go. So we'll go up now, and the actual number of contacts is about 127,399. Okay, and I go back to the default channel screen at this point. I'm pretty much finished with the video. I wanted to kind of just take new users through how to open up the CPS, and then maybe how to do a firmware update and acknowledge the MCU reboot. So if you are using the default code plug, you definitely want to go and turn on the optional setting, power on, startup reset to on. Okay. Thank you for listening to the video. There is a video on my YouTube page, N6DMR, which talks about the conversion of the JSON to the CSV, and I actually walk you through the entire process of downloading a JSON, converting it to a CSV, and loading it into the radio digital contacts. So a new user, feel free to go out, take a look. I have some other videos that might help you on APRS and roaming and other things. So thanks for listening today, and appreciate your time. I hope this helps.